Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Generational, transformational. These were some of the words being used by Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne before the federal budget came out on Tuesday, the first of the Carney government. Was it? My name is Mike Eppel, and joining me on the line for post-budget analysis is Ian Lee, Associate Professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Ian, good to see you.
My pleasure, Mike.
So what was your takeaway? I mean, whenever you cover budgets or talk about a budget, you always have that one tangible item. And sometimes it could be the smallest of things, but it's what you're talking about around the dinner table with the family kind of thing. This one, I don't know, was it me or was it $78 billion deficit and these numbers are just going to keep going up? Or actually, they're coming down, but you know what I mean? The red ink just is piling up here, even though the spending is on some pretty big things.
It is, and it's very mixed. What I'm going to say to you is a very mixed, on the one hand this, on the one hand that sort of thing. But just to start off, very big picture, it partly depends on what our comparison is. If we compare this to past, and I'm going to any of the Trudeau budgets of the last 10 years, it's a very, very major step forward because it's completely reversed the focus on consumption and redistribution. So I'm summarizing very big picture what the Trudeau years was. It didn't focus on growth. It didn't focus on investment. It didn't focus on productivity. It was just consumption and redistribution. And Carney has clearly departed in a very major way. So if that's our benchmark, our comparison, well, then this is a very, very important and very good budget today. Instead, you say, well, is it what he could have done or should have done? I think it falls short.
In what way?
He did reorient to investment. Let's give him full credit there. But he has told us since he was during the election, that we're in a very big crisis. We are. Our productivity is collapsing, and that's the only thing that can produce an increase in the standard of living. Paul Krugman, the famous Nobel Prize winners, taught everybody that. You want to increase your standard of living, you got to increase productivity. Our productivity is going down, down, down. The major metrics are getting worse. The debt to GDP is getting worse. The interest paid is getting worse. And there was a lot of low-hanging fruit that he did not pluck. Let me give you a couple of examples. He desperately needs money. The deficit's going through the roof. He should have announced the sale of the pipeline. Government shouldn't be in the pipeline business. They did it because nobody would build it, and then they built it. They even said it's the government policy to get rid of it. Well, he should have announced that. That's $30 billion or $35 billion of low-hanging fruit, and that he desperately needs. He could have announced, and there were rumors floating around that he might announce the privatization of the 10 major airports, which would yield billions of dollars. The Europeans have done it. The very progressive Europeans have done it. They privatized almost all their airports. The irony is the Americans, the uber capitalists, they own, the government of the United States owns all the airports in the United States. They don't privatize them, but the Europeans did. He could have done that. On the public service, he's going to spread it over 3 years. He's doing it through attrition, and he's only doing, 35,000. He should have gone for a much bigger number because Trudeau added on 100,000 people in the 10 years that were not needed or necessary because the government had gone in the years before, 2005 to 2010, the government had completely transformed from paper-based to e-government that needs far fewer people, and then Trudeau put 100,000 more on. So he had lots of wiggle room and to do that, and he ducked. He didn't do that. So there's some examples of what I'm talking about. He did not. I applaud him for the getting rid of the emissions cap, but he did not get rid of the tanker ban. He did not get rid of Bill C-69, which are still barriers to developing our bounty of resources in this country. So I'm giving a very nuanced. On the one hand, he's taking us in the right direction, away from the failed direction of the last 10 years. That's good. Full credit. But he could have gone more quickly without being radical I'm not saying, he should have slashed and burned, but there were things he could have done that were not radical and wouldn't have turned the country on fire.
What I found interesting was preamble to all of this, they were talking about austerity and sacrifice.
Yes.
And all these things. And it kind of almost like they got cold feet the closer to they got to budget day, because there was this undercurrent of, well, maybe this won't pass. Now, I don't know if that was necessarily even a real threat, considering I think they're only 3 seats away, and and the NDP they don't want an election anyway. You can go into that, but it's almost as if they kind of pulled back from some of the most negative comments.
This is why I was disappointed, because the Liberals have in government, they've been in government for 3/4 of the century. So that's why I'm talking about the Liberals. It's not that I'm picking on them. And they've tended to go for the incrementalist approach. They've always gone for the incrementalist approach. No bold strokes. And Carney was elected because he said, we've got to do some really bold strokes. We got to do some really major surgery here, because the times are so tough and the situation is so dire and difficult. And then they blinked. And at the last minute, the crazy thing is, I think I've studied the Nick Nano's polls as well as the Ipsos polls and the Abacus polls. He's got an awful lot of political capital. You compare him to whom? Oh, it's obviously Pierre Poilievre, because he's the conservative opposition leader. And he's running way ahead of Poilievre on a personal level. And I just didn't believe it was credible that there was going to be an election, because the NDP are so deeply broke. I think they're 10 million in debt at their bank. And they would have figured out a way. The most obvious is just don't show up on the night of the vote. Get the flu. You get suddenly 24-hour flu. Or you abstain, or you do something you don't have to defeat the government. So I didn't think that was credible. And given that he's got so much political capital, there's so much goodwill towards Carney, I think he's got many more degrees of freedom. And you want to use that capital. I don't mean squander it, but you want to use it when you've got the people with you and there's support for you to take tough decisions. And there are things he could have done that are important and needed for this country. I'll give you one more. We've gone, unfortunately, in the last 10 or 15 years, we went more and more down the road of turning everything into universal social programs. And people say, isn't that wonderful? No, it's terrible. It's awful. Instead of means tested, giving it to people who need help, what we're doing is saying we're going to give it to social programs, daycare, dental plan, etc., to including high-income people like corporate lawyers and full professors and people making lots of money. They shouldn't be getting. We're squandering scarce resources. And he could have been the chance to say, I'm going to make all our social programs means tested so that the bottom 2 quintiles, the bottom 40%, are going to be, we're going to ensure that they are looked after. But people in the upper brackets are not going to continue to get free drugs and free daycare and free dental, etc. He could have done that, and the savings are in the billions and billions and billions, by the way. So that's something else he could have done. And so he didn't.
Well, we mentioned off the top about how this was very different than any of the Trudeau budgets, in as much as those were, micro targeted to each and every focus group or special interest group, whatever you want to call it. He didn't, it's as if they didn't want to unwind everything in one fell swoop. So maybe that, as for the civil service budgetary cuts, I mean, they're looking at, like you say, 40,000 jobs overall, attrition, retirement. They're not going to hire, obviously, to fill current jobs and save $60 billion somehow. I mean, that's a huge number in and of itself. But I also read in the budget, the contracts, the union contracts are up for renewal. And I'm wondering if they were just kind of going, if we do this, we're setting ourselves up for a big strike issue. Maybe they're like what they've got with Canada Post or something like that.
I understand what you're saying, but I think that if he had done, let's say 50 or the rumor I had heard quite frequently in the last 2 weeks was 70,000. And I thought that's a very interesting number, because that's about the number that Chrétien announced in 1995. And he could say, hey, precedent. Prime Minister Chrétien did it. Good enough for him. Why not? He could have played that. And the other thing, too, I want to bring out, because, the public sector unions are saying, oh, my God, this is terrible. We can't throw people out of work. They won't have a job. We are in serious labor shortages. and they're only going to get worse and worse. 1/3 of the boomers are still in the workforce, and they're all going to be gone in the next 5 years. So what I'm trying to say is if there had been layoffs, or if there will be layoffs at Canada Post or at the government itself, those people are going to get reabsorbed into these across the economy so quickly, we are not going to see an increase in unemployment going through the roof because there's such a shortage of people.
Okay, let's talk about some of the big ticket items, because defense is up to like $81 billion in new funding, and that was not a surprise considering they've got to raise it even more to get to the 5% of the NATO target. So
that's right.
That was my takeaway as the big winner from this budget.
It was, and I just hope now that he puts some really sharp people in there in defense. I'm talking on the procurement side, so that the money isn't squandered. You know, we've done a terrible job on defense procurement for the last 30, 40 years because we've been so concerned not about the technology we're buying, whether it's a submarine or an airplane. All we can talk about are the offsets, and are we going to put enough parts of the contract in Nova Scotia versus Quebec and we need to get past that. I mean, first off, if we try and build it ourselves in-house, it'll cost horrendous amounts of money, and it'll take decades to get built. That's why I hope we do buy, the submarine from South Korea or Sweden or whatever, buy them off the shelf. It'll be much cheaper and much, much faster. And then we'll honor our commitment much more quickly, and we'll even save money because it's off the shelf. And so the price will be actually lower than if we try and do it ourselves in our country.
Yeah, I just, you're right at the fact that if they're going to build new infrastructure, I mean, yeah, look, there is a very much a buy Canadian, build Canadian mantra to this, and that does make sense if you're going to do, for the military, and they're going to expand, like the number of, recruitment's going to go way up. I mean, when we talk, I said off the top, transformational, I would say it is in this case for the defense department.
I agree with you. That's the only part of the budget that I would call what it was transformational was what they're doing in military, because the money is so staggering, and the reforms that they're proposing, which are good because we've run down the military for literally 50, 60 years. And so this was long overdue to be repaired, and it's going to build credibility with our NATO allies. And of course, we're all in it together because we don't want Putin to take over Ukraine or invade Latvia or Estonia or some of the other small countries on the edge of Russia. So, and we've agreed, there's a consensus, I think, in Canada. We've got to do this. We've got to help the other countries stop Putin from his terrible destruction of Ukraine. So, the faster we can get roll out that money and buy, off-the-shelf technologies, whether it's airplanes or submarines or what have you, I think the better it will be.
Yeah, well, again, it seems to take years to buy any of these planes, for example. I mean, those have been in the order book for what, decades?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the issue of productivity. This whole idea of productivity. I mean, it's been a red flag issue for the Bank of Canada.
Yes,
saying Canada lags behind in this, and what was dubbed the productivity super deduction, which basically a company can write down all new capital investment pretty much right off the bat. It speeds things up. And Champagne's saying this brings our marginal effective corporate tax rate down 2%, and it's better than the U.S. Now, again, I don't know if anybody can really make that comparison. Yeah. But having said that, if you're a big company and if you can write off your expenses, does that, again, speed up your expansion plans?
I believe it will, because I believe in the principle of self-interest. And this has been advocated by business for a long time, the ability to write things off more quickly, which will cause them to then invest in that. So that's a good thing. But I just want to say on the productivity, this is the area where I thought he squandered the biggest opportunity. I'm not going to name any names. I was watching the coverage tonight, and there were some pundits saying, oh, we just don't really know, what to do about productivity. There's been all kinds of studies. I beg to differ respectfully. We have known for at least 100 years, and the Competition Bureau has talked about this endlessly, as has the Bank of Canada. Okay. And yes, we do know what is the single most important driver to drive productivity, and it's called competition. We have approximately 1/3 of our economy is protected from outside competition. That's a study by the it's either C.D. Howe or Fraser, it doesn't matter. The data is in the study. And we've protected all kinds of industries from outside competition. And why competition does this, Joseph Schumpeter, one of the greatest economists in the history of economics, taught the logic. He says, when you are facing competition, really aggressive competition, you're really terrified that your competitor is going to drive you out of business and kill you, meaning they're going to drive you into bankruptcy. So what do? You go out and you invest in R&D to come up with a better mousetrap, a better product, to give you an advantage over your competitors. That's what drives productivity, is companies investing in new technologies to defeat their competitors. And so we have massively protected industries. And I was hoping he was going to announce, supply management is a very good example, the telecom industry, where we don't allow any foreign telecom into Canada. And I was hoping he was going to announce a phase out of those protected industries, because that is the single most important thing you can do to address our declining productivity. And he didn't do it.
There was some focus on the banks and allowing credit unions to grow a little bit more, and
Yes, that's important.
Being able to switch banks without fees and making that easier.
Yeah, but it's very marginal stuff. The biggest single solution is to stop protecting industries and stop because then when they don't have competition, what do? This has been studied to death. They increase their prices because they know they can, because they don't face competition. Look at the cell phone industry. There's just 3 competitors. The banks, there's 5. Airlines, there's 3. These are very protected industries, and they charge much higher prices as a consequence. And he could have announced a slowly phased in opening up, not overnight, but phase it in so that they have time to adjust. And he didn't. And I thought he missed a huge opportunity there.
Yeah. A couple of other things about housing and infrastructure, billions being spent. And I thought a lot of it was about, the infrastructure for new subdivisions and things, the things you need for houses to be built. And I thought that was kind of interesting, although there, again, were some strings attached. In some cases, the provinces have to match dollar for dollar some of these spending initiatives. And I don't know if the provinces have the money right now.
Yes. Well, the one thing he did do is attaching the strings to the municipality, that they got to cut their development charges.
Right.
That's one of the most pernicious policies in Canada that I believe has contributed heavily to making housing unaffordable, because those municipal development charges are so huge. They're driving up the cost much, much higher for housing. And I've actually argued in some media interviews, the government should go so far as to say, if you don't reduce the municipalities, if you don't reduce those development fees, we're going to withhold money we transferred you. The federal government, people don't realize it. They're transferring billions every year, the gas tax, to the municipalities. Well, threaten to cut them off. Either you cut your development fees, or we're going to cut you off, and you're not going to get those gas tax revenues that you find so attractive. And because we're going to have to use that kind of force, I don't mean physical force, I mean economic blackmail with the municipalities, so that they will stop putting barriers in front of new housing projects.
Yeah. Just getting back to the economy and the deficit spending, because this budget really, set the tone that, since the fall fiscal and all the tariffs and everything that's gone on in the States, I mean, it slammed the revenue numbers.
Yes, it did.
And the expectations are not, great for any type of an economic rebound until we get out from under this trade war, however that may end. And I thought that was, we've got these deficit projections. I mean, half the time they're not worth the paper they're written on, because what's going to happen in 2026 or beyond, for goodness sakes, when they're talking about economic growth.
The last 10 years, the forecasts of finance of the government of Canada have been appalling, meaning they've got them wrong. They've always underestimated. And I am very worried about those numbers, because I don't think they're going to meet them. I think they're going to be worse. I think the deficit is going to be larger. And people know, because I hear people saying on talk radio and so forth, saying, well, so what? We just added on to the deficit. What the big deal? Mm-hmm. You don't realize, yes, you can add it on. I don't dispute that. But, if you go far enough and you become too deeply indebted, the markets will rebel and they can punish us. They can drive down the Canadian dollar, and we import 1/3 of everything in our country. So when you drive down the dollar, because most things are priced in US dollars, that makes the price of that product you're importing go up in Canadian dollars. And the other thing is ultimately they'll drive up interest rates on the bonds. They'll say, your credit rating is not that good. You're not reliable. And so they'll demand a premium. That's what's happened to countries like Venezuela and lots of developing countries where they have to pay a wicked premium for their bonds because the markets don't trust them. And so it's not a free lunch, and so if we let it get out of control, it's not out of control yet, but if we do let it get out of control, the markets can come back and bite us, and it will hurt.
Well, we're at $1.2 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
55 billion of that is debt servicing fees. It's going up to almost 1.6 trillion by 2029.
Yeah.
And we just cleared $1 trillion, a few years ago. I mean, this is spiraling.
I know.
The credit rating agencies, is there a risk they could cut it?
Absolutely. They did back in the day when in the Mulroney and Chrétien years, they cut our credit rating. And what that meant was people would say, so what? Who cares? When your credit rating is cut, the interest rate you have to pay goes up. Mm-hmm. So they hit you. It hurts. And I'm just worried that we could be slipping and sliding down that road that we did before that ultimately led to the largest downsizing in Canadian history under Chrétien.
The argument is, we're the best, the best worst of the G7.
Yes. That's not saying much.
It's not. But that's how they sell it.
I know, and it's a bad argument.
Yeah,
really is a bad argument.
The kitchen's on fire, but the house is fine, or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's that kind of an argument. So I'm hoping that he will, in the next, maybe in the next budget, maybe even it'll now be the spring update. So maybe they will announce further downsizing in the public service. I hope so. Not because I know lots of people in the public service. I'm not being anti-public service, but we need to get some more revenue, and cutting the public service some more will generate revenue savings from the salaries. And if you could list the pipeline, that's $30 to $35 billion. That's real money. And if he listed some other asset sales like the airports, and the government is a very large owner of land, because we need to get that deficit down because it's compounding and getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Ian Lee, thank you very much.
My pleasure very much. Thanks, Mike.
That was Ian Lee, Associate Professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. And that was The Big Story, post-budget edition. You can send us feedback on this episode or any of the episodes by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all of your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. My name is Mike Eppel. Thanks for listening.